Hey everyone, and welcome to another session of the Organizer Education Group. Today we are going to be continuing our reading of Full Spectrum Resistance. We only have a few people who have attended this evening, so we're only going to probably have about 3 readers, myself included. But yeah, we're going to get through it anyway. We might wait just a few more minutes here. Let me switch the view over. Why is that not working? No idea why this isn't working. Let's try that again. There we go. But yeah. So this is the chat. Only got a few people here, but here is the page we're on, I think. Let me go try to dig up where we were when we ended last time. Where were we? Okay, cool. This is where we said we were at the end of last time. So yeah, it just ended right here on this paragraph. Gelderloos also gives Ryder some of the credit. Do we want to get started? We want to wait a few more minutes, see if anybody shows up.
I think maybe just like 3 minutes wouldn't hurt.
Gotcha. Yeah, we'll do the order. So the order, I'll go 1. Okay, give me just a second here. The cat is just screaming nonstop. Okay, I am back. I did things, hopefully, that will be the things that he, in his little kitty brain, really wanted, so he can stop being ridiculous. Let me see. Has anybody showed up in the meantime? Yeah, nice. Okay, we got another person. Yeah, no, I mean, I did his kitty litter. I guess that's maybe what it was. We hope. Cool. So, yeah, reviewer, if you want to go at the end, just type 4, and that'll put you fourth in the order for reading. So let's see. All right. So that's fine. We'll just get started then. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you for sticking around after the very long silence. Cat is still being ridiculous right now. He's running around in the background going, meow, 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 running around like just knocking things over. I don't know why. I don't know why he's knocking things over, but he is. Oh, here he is. Now he's here. Let's see if he does any chaos here. You got any chaos in store? Oh, he's probably going to knock over some books. Okay, he hasn't knocked him over. Oh, no, he resisted. I'm proud of him. Incredible. So we are just going. Yeah. We'll just say it has something to do with the moon's gravitational pull. I like that. It's not that he is actually a crazy cat, and that he's absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, so I guess tonight will probably be a little bit slow. Seems like we're not getting a lot. We don't have a lot of people here reading, but we also don't even have a lot of people here viewing. So this is one of those lazy evenings, but I figure let's do the session anyway. I'm going to get us started here. Gelderloos also gives rioters some of the credit for the success of the civil disobedience campaign in Birmingham. Quote, Birmingham was a repeat of King's Albany campaign, which ended a total failure. All its participants locked up, and no one slightly moved by the supposed dignity of victimhood. The difference? In Birmingham, the local youths got fed up, rioted, and kicked police out of large parts of the city for several days. The authorities chose to negotiate with King and replace de jure segregation with de facto segregation in order to avoid losing control entirely. End quote. Do not think that those who joined in the riots were mindless hordes motivated only by anger. To the contrary, a government study of the 1967 riots in Detroit found that the average rioter was, quote, substantially better informed about politics than Negroes who were not involved in the riots, end quote. Of course, many working class people had a different perspective on civil rights. Civil equality was not enough when profound economic inequality prevailed. MLK met jeers when he visited Watts. One man shouted at him, quote, I had a dream. Hell, we don't need no damn dreams. We want jobs, end quote. Lance Hill argues that, quote, the Watts riot had been a black working class referendum on nonviolence and the civil rights strategy, and King had lost decisively, end quote. Hill believes that the dogmatically pacifist nature of the mainstream organizations failed to prevent this kind of violence. Quote, ironically, because of its inflexibility, nonviolence ultimately delivered young people into the hands of street violence, since there was no organized alternative in the middle class dominated civil rights organizations until 1965, end quote. It's shocking to me that the Deacons are so poorly known given the tremendous impact they had. The Deacons fundamentally shifted the grassroots attitude toward nonviolence and self-defense in the South. They made white vigilantes afraid to attack black people. By 1965, writes Hill, the Deacons had naturalized the Klan in the South. The Deacons had neutralized the Klan in the South. Despite their importance, as Hill writes, quote, much of the popular history of the civil rights era rests on the myth of nonviolence, the perception that the movement achieved its goals through nonviolent direct action. The myth posits that racial inequality was dismantled by a nonviolent movement that awakened the moral conscience of white America. In this narrative, Martin Luther King Jr. serves as the moral metaphor of the age, while black militants, advocates of racial pride and coercive force, are dismissed as ineffective rebels who alienated whites with black power rhetoric and violence. End quote. Hill calls it the, quote, myth of nonviolence and a comforting but vacant fiction. In the end, segregation yielded to force as much as it did to moral suasion. Violence in the form of street riots and armed self defense played a fundamental role in uprooting segregation and economic and political discrimination from 1962 to 1965. Next.
Only after the threat of black violence emerged did civil rights legislation move to the forefront of the national agenda. Only after the deacons appeared were the civil rights laws effectively enforced and the obstructions of terrorists and complicity of local law enforcement agencies neutralized. End quote. By 1962, he argues, Martin Luther King Jr. and the nonviolent organizations had achieved as much as they could. So with this history of both nonviolence and armed self-defense, why is it that nonviolence is almost always the only story we hear about? The fact is that nonviolence was never fully accepted by civil rights activists in the South, but it became an official doctrine, as Hill explains, after a coalition of Northern liberals, pacifists, and leftists managed to impose nonviolence on the movement because they... You scroll up, please. Because they possess superior organizational and funding resources, end quote. That coalition had the particular aim of making changes to federal legislation through a campaign of tactics like civil disobedience. Grassroots organizers were concerned this was happening at the cost of local struggles, and one warned in a memo that MLK-style campaigns left a string of embittered cities in their wake. Regardless, that well-organized and well-funded coalition set the agenda for most of the movement, and for the same reasons, has written and defined that movement's accepted history. We live in a time when many people in power are attempting to roll back gains made in this era, so it is crucial that we understand the tactics that actually worked to defend and advance civil rights. Recall also that most of those who believed in self-defense before the time of the Deacons and the Black Panthers did their organizing quietly, partly out of a need for secrecy and partly out of deference to the nonviolent parts of the movement. This secrecy meant a lack of documentation and media coverage about them. Furthermore, the separation between violence and nonviolence was greater in public than in private. In Bogalusa, CORE and the Deacons were officially distinct to maintain the protective appearance of nonviolence for CORE, but behind the scenes the groups overlapped heavily. In many places, there was a similar overlap between self-defense organizers and officially nonviolent groups like CORE, the NAACP, and so on. I suspect another reason this unorthodox history has been obscured has to do with how the civil rights movement is defined. For many people, the civil rights movement is synonymous with nonviolence. It's the no true Scotsman's fallacy. Those who didn't adhere to pacifism were ostensibly not part of the movement. Official histories often ignore or dismiss those who didn't believe in strict nonviolence. In an introduction to the book accompanying the documentary Eyes on the Prize, civil rights activist and former Senator Julian Bond says that anger from Black militants clouded the movement after 1965 and tells his children that militant activists had always been on the sidelines of the civil rights struggles. Quote, but when it came time for sit-ins or freedom rides, the militants would decline to join us, explaining that they did not espouse nonviolence, end quote. He dismisses militancy as empty anger. Next.
But that take on history is inconsistent, if not simply wrong. Consider Stokely Carmichael, prominent member of the Black Panther Party and popularizer of the term Black Power. Carmichael is the epitome of those who Bond blames for the decline of the civil rights movement, those who supposedly torpedoed collective struggle through their refusal to participate in nonviolence. But Carmichael, unlike Julian Bond, was a freedom fighter. In fact, Carmichael was the youngest freedom fighter arrested and held at the infamous Parchman Farm visit in 1961. He spent 53 days isolated in a 6-by-9-foot cell in maximum security without access to books and was abused by guards. Carmichael participated in many sit-ins, marches, and other civil disobedience activities. After the Freedom Rise, he was arrested another 26 times, taking nonviolent action in the Deep South. Carmichael was hardly an obscure figure in 1966, he became chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, an organization which both Julian Bond and Stokely Carmichael helped to found. Though what Bond said may have applied to some militants, it clearly does not apply to the deacons and their allies. The deacons gladly joined sit-ins and all kind of nonviolent action, and their presence at many such events ensured that the actions were successful and that they remained nonviolent. The deacons and militants in many different struggles are often happy to work with others, so long as non-militant leaders don't insult or condemn the militants out of self-righteousness. Lastly, the obscurity of the deacons is also a result of that fact that many journalists, especially the white journalists of the national press, simply refuse to cover black self-defense organizing out of fear that it would spread. There are fewer written sources about self-defense, and actual historians wanting to write about self-defense have had to get out of the dusty library stacks and go find people to talk to about this hidden history. Having said all this, I should make it clear that I'm not condemning nonviolence as a tactical choice, nor am I condemning those who use or advocate it. I admire MLK's commitment and drive greatly. And in the context of the time, MLK and other nonviolent organizers really did push the limits. The courage and persistence they showed, their willingness to break the law and to risk jail time, injury, or death, deserves acclaim and is much needed in the present day. Next.
I don't want to get bogged down in a debate about violence versus nonviolence because I'm not making an argument for violence. I'm making an argument for being effective. The deacons made choices that they thought would maximize the amount of political force they could wield. So did James Meredith and Rosa Parks and the Freedom Riders and the people who rioted in Watts and Detroit and dozens of other places. The use of nonviolence in the civil rights struggle was an essential, effective, and perfectly correct tactic for many different groups in different situations, and cooperation among different groups in the movement allowed each to play to their strengths and to engage the full spectrum of resistance. This section is titled Cultures of Resistance. So this is in contrast to the culture of defeat that we talked about previously. Successful movements use diverse strategies and means of organizing, but movements that fight to win have something crucial in common. They all emerge from cultures of resistance. If a culture of defeat is like a sinkhole which devours optimism and action, a culture of resistance is fertile soil for defiance and successful campaigns. Culture of resistance gives a movement deep roots to nourish and sustain it. What is a culture of resistance? Cultures of resistance across history have common elements. First is memory. In cultures of resistance, people know their history and remember their struggles. The most effective way for an occupier to quash resistance is to eliminate its memory. Once cultural amnesia sets in, an occupation feels like it has lasted forever. Resistance feels both pointless and unprecedented. That amnesia can be reversed, even after a very long time. In a culture of resistance, struggles are treasured even if they fall short of victory. If a culture of resistance is the soil, even unsuccessful campaigns can enrich that soil, like compost, once they have been integrated into it. And like building soil, establishing a culture of resistance can be a long and slow process. The second one is living culture. The memory of a culture of resistance is not a dusty archive or a stodgy museum exhibit behind glass. It is a living memory, a living culture. Resistance is celebrated and reenacted through a whole spectrum of cultural undertakings like plays, films, zines, books, newspapers, murals, photography, songs, and revival gatherings. Resistance becomes intertwined with the activities of daily life, from sports to food to clothing. Consider, for example, the resurgence of the sport of hurling in Ireland, the shift from tea to coffee in revolutionary America, and the role of homespun textiles and salt making in Indian independence. The next is oppositional culture. Cultures of resistance are more than just alternative cultures. Cultures of resistance understand that the dominant culture is not only corrupt, but unjust, expansionist, and relentless. They do not abandon struggle to retreat into lonely isolation. They engage with the dominant culture and with those captured or enthralled by it. Next.
That doesn't mean that resistors don't need retreats, havens, or areas of redoubt. We do. Those places may be community centers, farms, or longhouses. But in an oppositional culture, those sanctuaries and autonomous zones are not places to hopelessly await an inevitable defeat. They are bases for resistors to rest and recuperate, to strategize and to organize. And they are bases from which to launch offensives. Action and material gains. Although a culture of resistance can be expressed in art, music, writing, and so on, its ultimate purpose is to give rise to political action. Progress and learning happen only through action. That doesn't mean every action is perfect. People make mistakes and learn from them. But only through action can resistance movements be forged, trained, and straightened. Action keeps people together and helps to ward off horizontal hostility. As Sarah Falconer explained to me, practical work makes it easier to get past moments of disagreement. Quote, if people are counting on you, it grounds you. It's hard to get upset about little things, end quote. Solidarity. Solidarity is the bedrock of a culture of resistance. People understand that they have a common enemy and a common struggle, and that the success of that struggle depends on mutual support. They understand that no action is perfect, and that the best way to move forward with allies is not through ideological quibbling, but through mutual support, feedback, and constructive criticism. When people absolutely can't support each other for whatever reason, they at least avoid fighting each other, especially in public. They also understand that acrimonious internal battles can be even more destructive than external repression. Solidarity is the only way to keep a movement from being divided and conquered. Risk and self-sacrifice. Resistance requires personal sacrifice from those involved. Sometimes this is easy and immediately rewarding. I enjoy making food for an event or spending time planning an action with my comrades. But sometimes sacrifice is difficult and frightening. Sometimes we risk our freedom, our bodies, our lives. This need not be a reckless risk. We will not be effective if we seek martyrdom for the sake of martyrdom. But to be effective requires that we set aside our short-term personal needs and throw our energies and our lives into greater projects of freedom and survival. Moral and material support for frontline activists. Not everyone is able or willing to take the greatest personal risks. Not everyone will blockade a pipeline or take over a city council meeting. That direct action is the job of only a small percentage of people at any given time. The job of the majority of people in a culture of resistance is to support those few. They need support morally through vocal support for militancy and advocacy for resistance. They also need material support through food, fundraising, childcare, prisoner support, and all the rest. A wide base of material support is needed to win any conflict. Communities and community building. Healthy, just, sustainable communities are one ultimate goal of successful resistance. They are also a basic human need. Without community, resistance is lonely, difficult, and unlikely to succeed. Communities are the basis of a living culture, of solidarity, and of nearly everything a culture of resistance needs. And the strong ties that develop in a strong community are what enable people to take real risks for the greater good. See chapter 4, recruitment and something. Next.
Movements need a culture of resistance, but effective movements do not simply appear without effort once a community of resistance is established. Communities must organize. Cultures of resistance must think critically and strategically about how to build effective and vibrant movements. And there is a reciprocal relationship between resistance movements and cultures of resistance. Each builds and strengthens the other. As they become better organized, cultures of resistance provide for their own people. Labor historian David Thompson says, unions began as self-help initiatives, providing their own pension, sickness, and health benefits, before they were ever able to extract these concessions from employers. Once a culture of resistance becomes a revolutionary movement, it builds institutions that can facilitate a more just and equitable society. The United States and the Irish and many others had revolutionary courts. The Black Panther Party had its survival programs for food, education, and healthcare. Revolutionary movements around the world have had fully developed logistical networks and parallel institutions. Sometimes a culture of resistance can revive or strengthen institutions that already exist, as is still the case for some indigenous cultures. Sometimes a culture's institutions have been so destroyed, forgotten, or hopelessly corrupted that they must be created anew. Subsistence and community sufficiency. For city dwellers in an industrial age, it is easy to forget that successful resistance movements throughout history have been materially self-sufficient. Free communities grew, gathered, hunted, and fished their own foods. They relied on the commons. They made their own houses, and as discussed in the chapter on logistics, they often equipped themselves with their own weapons, communications, equipment, medical services, and so on. Indeed, the freedom to be self-sufficient on other people's land was often the primary reason for struggle. On their people's land was often the primary reason for struggle. Occupiers always tried to separate resistance movements from the land and herd the people into controlled settlements, whether Indian reservations in the occupied Americas, the Jewish ghettos in occupied Europe, or the strategic hamlets in Vietnam. Community sufficiency is especially important in a time of economic and industrial decline. No resistance movement will be able to succeed in the coming decades without rebuilding or strengthening both its ties to the land and its capacity for self-reliance. All of these things are needed in a culture of resistance. All of these things are needed to build movements that win. But there is more than that. A successful movement must engage as many people as possible, using a wide variety of effective tactics. It must use, as I'll argue in the next chapter, the full spectrum of resistance. Next.
So we are now on to chapter 3, full spectrum resistance. It starts with two quotes. First quote is by Stephen Best and Anthony J. Nacella II. a fire, or maybe the second chapter of A Fire in the Belly of the Beast. It says, while standpoints such as deep ecology, social ecology, ecofeminism, animal liberation, black liberation, and the ELF are all important, none can accomplish systemic social transformation by itself. Working together, however, through a diversity of critiques and tactics that mobilize different communities, a flank of militant groups and positions can drive a battering ram into the structures of power and domination and open the door to a new future. The second one is a quote that it says, Greek insurrectionary slogan, solidarity is a flame that cannot be extinguished. So now it says, Women's Fire Brigade. It's November 1982. In British Columbia, a new chain of pornography stores has been spreading, expanding from 1 to 13 stores in only a year. Red Hot Video specializes in violent pornography that eroticizes and glorifies the abuse of women. Their videos have been widely condemned by women's groups in British Columbia and across Canada and the United States. These videos are bad enough to be illegal under provincial law. But despite a lobbying campaign by dozens of women's groups, the government has failed to enforce its own laws. The Red Hot Video stores have remained open and profitable. So a group of women, dubbing themselves the Women's Fire Brigade, decide to take matters into their own hands. They include Ann Hansen and Julie Belmas, who have spent years in the underground group Direct Action. The women spend weeks planning, and on the night of November 22nd, they split into 3 groups and go to 3 separate Red Hot Video stores. After checking to make sure that the stores are empty, they smash windows and pour gasoline inside. Then they throw in lit matches. The gasoline ignites immediately. The explosion is bigger than they expected, and flames burst through the smashed windows. Hansen is standing too close to one of the buildings, and the flames burn her face. She gets second-degree burns and loses some hair, but will recover fully. One of the stores burns to the ground completely. A second is partially destroyed. The Women's Fire Brigade issues a communique explaining their action. Quote, although these tapes violate the Criminal Code of Canada and the BC guidelines on pornography, all lawful attempts to shut down Red Hot Video have failed because the justice system was created and is controlled by rich men to protect their profits and property. As a result, we are left no viable alternative but to change the situation ourselves through illegal means. This is an act of self-defense against hate propaganda. End quote. Above ground women's groups are surprised, but wisely refrain from condemning the arson. The British Columbia Federation of Women issues a statement the next day. Quote, although we did not participate in the firebombing of November 2nd, 1982, we are in sympathy with the anger and frustration of the women who did. End quote. The firebombing and the media and public attention it generates galvanizes above ground groups and spawns a whole new campaign. Next.
Pickets of the stores take place province-wide. Some of the women present wear red plastic firefighters' hats with Women's Fire Brigade written across the front. Many small local groups form to organize. A few months after the firebombing, Henson and Belmas are arrested as part of different police investigation. The other women involved in the Women's Fire Brigade are never caught. But on the same day as those arrests take place, the RCMP raid the Red Hot Video store in Victoria and lay charges of distributing obscene material. Writing later on, Ann Hansen would call the firebombing her most successful militant action. Quote, within the year of the firebombings, the franchise had been whittled down from 13 stores to only 1. Success could also be measured in terms of popular support. In the days following the firebombings, radio phone-in shows devoted to the firebombing were inundated with supportive calls. Letters in the editorial sections of the newspaper weighted as heavily in support of the action. The most obvious sign of public support was the large number of women who would show up at demonstrations, wearing red plastic fire hats and claiming to be members of the WFB. After the police raid on the Victoria store on January 20th, 1983, the Red Hot Video stores that hadn't already closed down or changed their names or moved out of the province were crippled in legal fees due to the ongoing series of raids by the RCMP, end quote. She would conclude, quote, "The Women's Fire Brigade was successful because it acted around an issue that the vast majority of people support and used tactics with which ordinary people could identify," end quote. Divide and conquer. The most effective way for a ruler to secure his power is to turn those he rules against each other. Nadia, can you mute, please? Through the 1960s and 70s,
Hey, Andrew, you need to mute your mic.
I'm sorry.
It's all good.
through the 1960s and 70s, the FBI's counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, secretly sought to undermine and divide leftist political groups in the US. It targeted everyone from moderate civil liberties groups to militants like the Black Panthers. FBI agents did this using a variety of techniques ranging from surveillance and phony letters all the way to targeted assassinations. They didn't just want to destroy individual people and groups, they wanted to destroy movements. Effective COINTELPRO operations might get the Black Panthers of the East to hate the Black Panthers of the West, or drive a wedge between the American Indian movement and Puerto Rican independence organizers. The FBI also wanted potential sympathizers in the public to fear these groups and for established liberals to condemn them. I'll discuss those schemes and how to counteract them in later chapters. But for now, the important thing to remember is this. COINTELPRO worked not only because it was secret, but because it mostly exacerbated tensions and schism that already existed. COINTELPRO was most effective where solidarity was already weak, where groups were already fragmented, where organizers were already competitive and paranoid, where resistance movements could be divided along lines of tactics, race, class, and gender. Next.
Any movement that wants to win must be able to counteract these schisms, not just with the factors created by spies and cops and newscasters, but those even more deep-seated rifts, those created by oppressions like racism, patriarchy, homophobia, which take a long time and a lot of work and commitment to heal, and which perhaps can only be fixed through revolution. An effective movement must deal also with the practical conflicts that arise in the course of any campaign over goals, tactics, and strategy. And so, a resistance movement that wants to win must develop a deep and enduring tradition of genuine solidarity. It must develop a shared culture of resistance. There are many movements in history that have been able to do these things, at least temporarily. Organizers like the Deacons for Defense and the radical labor groups during the Depression were able to build real solidarity among people using different tactics. They combined community organizing and militant direct action. Movements like the 1960s Rainbow Coalition and the Poor People's Campaign, which I'll discuss in this chapter, brought allies together from many different backgrounds and ethnicities. Such movements have often been able to uphold solidarity, and they have used what I'm calling full-spectrum resistance. We'll come back to successful movements like these. But I want to start with a critical direct source of intra-movement conflict, the issue of militant tactics. The Overton window in radical flanking. There is a common idea on the liberal left that any resistance action must already be supported by the majority, that otherwise it will alienate potential supporters. This is a major reason that so much of the left has retreated to non-confrontational lifestyle approaches. But the historical reality is much different. History is full of movements that have been galvanized and propelled by actions the establishment considered dangerous and even extreme. The Women's Fire Brigade, the Deacons for Defense, and suffragist women's social and political union are three important examples I've already touched on. I will discuss many more throughout the course of this book. Actions on the fringe of acceptability can benefit a movement in many different ways. Militant action makes a moderate position and the possibility of compromise much more appealing to those in power, and it makes formally risky action appear more moderate. This is an old idea that social movements have used for centuries. Indeed, the dynamic between militants and the moderates has even been explored in political science as the Overton window. This concept originated from Joseph Overton, a political analyst at a right-wing think tank. He wanted to understand how new ideas can move from the fringe to the status quo. In his continuum, an idea started off as unthinkable, and then it became more familiar. And as it became more familiar, it became radical, then acceptable, sensible, popular, and eventually policy. Next.
So there's just like there's like a picture here, and it's just like pretty much what it just said. It's like a scale from unthinkable to policy, and then like it just shows like new ideas are unthinkable, and then they become radical, and then acceptable, and then sensible, and they're accepted once they get to acceptable and sensible. It continues. Social movements can push ideas along this continuum, either in the popular sphere or the opinion of the political establishment. Take anti-segregation struggles, for example. At the beginning of the 1900s, racial integration was more or less unthinkable for most white people in the United States. However, the idea moved from being unthinkable to merely radical through the first half of the century as people fought segregation and as black migration into cities and World War II helped put pressure on the system. Here we have another one. It's the Overton window again, except now it has like stuff about the civil rights movement in here. So it shows integration in the 1900s was unthinkable. Then integration in the 1950s was radical. Then by the early 1960s, excuse me, I gotta sneeze. Excuse me. Then by the early 1960s, integration was now sensible and popular. And by the late 1960s, it was policy. It continues. Through the civil rights fights of the late 1950s and early 1960s, integration gained support and sympathy from the general population, especially in the North, of course, and it became a matter of public policy with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. An idea or political position can become more acceptable through propaganda and repetition, or it can advance through political struggle and conflict. I have in my hand a copy of a political cartoon from a 1962 issue of the New York Post. Two black men, seemingly of opposing views, are having a pint at the pub and are arguing about nonviolence as two white men listen from the next booth. As the black men get up to leave, the militant of the two remarks, quote, "Your nonviolence better work pretty soon, man. A lot of us are getting damn tired," end quote. As soon as they leave, the two wide-eyed white men agree that the United States should integrate immediately, quote, "before those extremists take over," end quote. But outside, the pacifist lights a cigarette for his militant friend and congratulates him on a job well done. Quote, "There's another white bar down the block," remarks the militant. "Let's go down there and panic them." Let's take a look at this cartoon. Oh, that's too bad. It doesn't just show it to us. Oh no, how do I get back? Well, that sucks. I have to like actually go find it. Let me say in my hand. I have in my hand. Wow, what did it? There we go. No. There we go. Okay, found my way back. When new, more radical ideas are advocated, they can, quote, bump over less radical ideas by shifting the entire continuum. If you have an idea that is considered too radical, say direct defiance of segregation and mass arrests, A perfect way to nudge that over into acceptability is to introduce an even more extreme idea, one that had previously been unthinkable, like armed self defense. When the civil rights struggle started, after all, polite protests were considered dangerously radical by some. The same went for boycotts and lunch counter sit ins when first used. Organizers, including Martin Luther King Jr., were attacked even by liberal supporters of integration for being outside agitators who ought to leave the issue of segregation up to the courts. But boycotts and sit ins made regular protests seem even more acceptable and safe. Here we have the Overton window again, and it shows basically like all those ideas on the Overton window. Like armed self-defense is over an unthinkable and radical. Acceptable is like confrontation and mass arrests. Sensible is mass boycotts. Popular is protest marches. When the Freedom Rides began, they were too radical for MLK. He spent the entire night before the first group departed trying to convince the riders to call it off. But the Freedom Riders did go, and in doing so, they nudged over the spectrum. Armed self-defense organizers would also push the nonviolent resistors into acceptability as they became more publicly prominent in the early 1960s. Next.
Far from alienating new members, militant and radical ideas can make participation feel safer and more acceptable to new people, so long as people have the option of participating in the way they choose. Civil rights protest marches had once been a fringe event, but as they were pushed along the spectrum of acceptability, they became increasingly popular and well attended. The 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, where King gave his I Have a Dream speech, was attended by over 300,000 people. Of course, this illustration is simplified for practical reasons, and many of these changes overlapped rather than happening sequentially. But you get the idea. The introduction of new radical ideas and action is a crucial way for any social movement to move forward. Radical flanking and the Overton window informed many radical movements, including Earth First. Howie Wolk, a founder of Earth First, explained, quote, "When I helped found Earth First, I thought that it would be the sacrificial lamb of the environmental movement. We would make the Sierra Club look moderate by taking positions that most people would consider ridiculous." End quote. As Matthew Walton and Jessica Whitey point out, quote, EF explicitly stated that although they adopted more radical action in support of their no compromise position, they did not pass judgment on the mainstream groups for working largely within the system. EF organizers envisioned a symbiotic relationship between the two wings of the movement, end quote. Although the liberal left often denounces fringe action, the right wing understands the importance of the Overton window very well. Yeah. A right-wing think tank first articulated the idea. Indeed, the right wing in North America has been very successful at driving the political climate continuously rightward for the past several decades, to the point where formerly centrist parties adopt policies that were considered right-wing not many years ago. The right has used many different techniques to achieve this political shift, including continuous propaganda through ownership of the corporate media. But one of the most important techniques has been the shifting of the Overton window. This is the role played by Fox News and Breitbart, and especially by their most extreme and vicious pundits. By constantly and loudly pushing the boundaries of the right wing, they have cleared the way for the majority to shift rightward as the liberals stumble along behind in an attempt to appear serious and credible. This is a conscious strategy. Glenn Beck even wrote a book titled The Overton Window. Next.
The liberal left, which periodically purges itself of radicals and radical ideas, has no countervailing force or vigor. Rather than going on the offensive, it is constantly backpedaling in an attempt to appear acceptable. Liberals mocked the extremism and outright silliness of Beck, smiled smugly when Sarah Palin was defeated in an election. But their role was not to get elected or to be embraced by the mainstream. It was to drive the mainstream ever rightward so that more extreme corporate policies seemed acceptable and even desirable. And indeed, with the election of Donald Trump, this strategy has again proved fruitful for the far right. Perhaps you've noticed, as I have, that there is a particularly destructive dynamic at work in electoral politics between liberals and conservatives, or between Democrats and Republicans, especially on economic policy. When the right-wing parties are in power, they push towards privatization, cuts to social programs, and generally do their best to move wealth from the commons into private pockets. Eventually, enough people become angry at this that the right wing is thrown out of government and a more liberal party is elected to bring change. Change you can believe in. But when the supposedly liberal party comes into power, they very rarely reverse any conservative economic policies. Quite the contrary. They often keep the changes of the predecessors or even advance them incrementally. It works the same in many different places. By swapping places every term or two, the dominant political parties can advance the capitalist policies desired by the corporations that fund them both so generously. The two parties, seemingly locked in combat, are instead part of the same dreadful mechanism. They function as a ratchet. The corporate conservatives push the toothed wheel of the ratchet forward. The Liberal Party acts as the stopper, preventing the people from pushing public policy back to its previous state. This is not how things must work if we want it to move in a progressive direction instead of a corporate one. Like the Overton window, the left can use this ratcheting mechanism for good instead of evil. Effective political movements throughout history, especially resistance movements, have built ratchets for beneficial change through alliances of moderates and militants. Militants have pushed change forward through direct and rebellious action, and moderates have helped to cement that change by building organizations and sometimes by institutionalizing that change. If the militant impulse is to challenge and disrupt those in power, the moderate impulse is often to try to converse or negotiate with the powerful. One main reason that militants and moderates may have a rocky relationship is that militants want to create discomfort for people of privilege and moderates want to relieve it. Next.
So that puts us right there at the 8:30 mark. So I think we can end the reading portion for this evening. And we only have a few people here. However, I think we can still have a conversation. I just want to open the floor to everybody who was here and see if there were any portions that really interested you or that you'd like to talk about.
I'd just say the ratcheting effect in general, that whole, like it seemed like to be the whole back half of it is very good.
I was kind of intrigued by that part where they were talking about the guys in the bar. I kind of missed a little bit of that, but just that idea of going out and trying to change people's opinions through, one person being the radical and one person not being the, I don't know. That's a really intriguing idea to me.
I just realized I had my mic muted on the Cooperation Tulsa on the stream. Could people in the stream hear me talking? Has it just been long silence when it came around to my part? I hope I didn't mess anything up there. Sorry, but I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize. you were saying you were talking about the Overton window, or were you talking about radical flanking?
Yeah, I guess that idea of radical flanking, but I was really done talking, so I just thought that was an interesting part of what I heard just then. So
Yeah, no, I think radical flanking absolutely is an important concept. And that's what a lot of people miss, is that, the big stuff that gets remembered is like what gets remembered in the history books is all the peaceful stuff. That's what they want to write about. But they don't want to write about all of the radical stuff that was happening at the same time that acted as an alternative so that they could turn to the people in power and be like, hey, wouldn't you prefer it was us, the peaceful ones, that you dealt with instead of them, the ones with guns? Like, there's a lot of examples of that in history.
Yeah, I really like the whole bit about the deacons for defense and the importance of solidarity between those tactics, which we really need right now. I think in general, like specifically because one of the things in the text that I really like is when they say that because the deacons of defense were in like the freedom rides or some marches, they remained nonviolent because of that. And we talked a bit about that before, but this whole concept of nonviolence not including self-defense, but then if you don't have self-defense, then people will, well, might in this case very much they would, and like white people would attack and kill black people, and the only way to stop that violence was to have the threat of violence, the self-defense organizing. And I think that's definitely I was thinking about I don't know if y'all heard of this, the Uniting for Peace resolution at the United Nations. It's a mechanism that the General Assembly can take to circumvent the veto at the Security Council to potentially send, well, to take action to stop, per example, a genocide. And this can very much include a military intervention. And I was talking to some people about this, and they were saying that because they're nonviolent, they don't think they might. They're not sure that they could support such a resolution. Apart from other, there's definitely it would need to be well done, right, and not hurt self-determination and everything. But if it was a good one, the idea that someone could be against it because they're nonviolent made so no sense to me, because there's so much violence happening right now because of the genocide. If you want to stop the violence, you need to stop the genocide. And like there's already been so much that's been tried and so much time. Yeah, I didn't understand that. Yeah, to me that's like a really important point here, that to have this force to potentially enact and like this threat of violence against massive violence that's already happening, like it can be a very efficient and thus valid tactic.
I was gonna say in response to what you were saying about people like comparing violence differently, of like what the UN would do compared to like what Israel's doing. Is the answer is kind of in lies like what's on the screen now. It's the fact that they want to go to the systems of power perpetrating that violence to try to make them feel comfortable enough to try to fix that. And other people are trying to get to the root of it. So they see all systems of violence and all these structures, when the other people are trying to uphold those in order to get what they want.
One of the things that I noted when we were reading through, first of all, I like the culture of resistance. Oh, that whole portion is like, I think really good. And we should be like taking it very seriously and thinking about how we can like consciously build all of the aspects of the culture of resistance. And we'll talk about that in a second. But that quote by Sarah Falconer, it was really simple, but it really is something I found is true. And it says, if people are counting on you, it grounds you. It's hard to get upset about little things. I think like the more important the work you're engaged in, like the more important your organizing is, the more people are affected by it, the more people are invested in it, the more you're like, it's like easier to commit, but also it like keeps you focused on important things rather than getting all caught up in like feuds and getting annoyed over like personality conflicts. Once you have like a broader conception of like the seriousness of what needs to be done, and you're like really enveloped in it, those things become less important, and you can kind of just be like, all right, anyway, back to what I was saying, like, your mind is kind of on the prize in a sense. I thought that was a good insight in there. But the other thing I was going to say was about the culture of resistance. So I just wanted to like go through each of the individual parts here and talk about, like just kind of get people's thoughts on each of these. So the very first one is memory. How do people think we do as a movement? We could talk about it here locally in Tulsa, but also just kind of like broadly as a movement. How do we think we do on memory here in both like in the United States and abroad?
Well, I think it kind of touches on it in the living culture aspect, but just like making like the memory, you practice that memory. Like, what I mean? Like commemorating that with events, commemorating that with like doing the things that they taught us with those actions, setting up celebrations or like writing about them, doing plays of it, making songs. That's a great way to instill that.
Yeah, no, I think that, back in like the early 1900s, so much of it was in songs here in the United States. Everybody was like writing songs about it. We had all these like folk singers and like Americana sort of artists making all of these like odes to our martyrs, I notice we have a lot less of that these days. It doesn't need to be folk again, but we have a lot less songs being written to our martyrs.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, memory is a big problem. Like a lot of stuff that we're reading in this book, although I've read a lot about history and activism, like a lot of it I didn't know. And like if I think of my state education, of course they were not going to teach us about resistance against hierarchy, oppression, and specifically state-related oppression. So a lot of it gets lost, and it's definitely something that we see a lot in terms of fascistic movements who destroy documents, archives, websites now, try to erase people, but also, acts of resistance. And then we forget, and then we see it in this book, like we forget all these teachings about solidarity between, nonviolent civil disobedience and violence or like self-defense, how they're important to be together. And then like this is pushed. These two tactics are thought of being completely separate now. So yeah, there's a lot of work to remember all that.
Yeah, the ones I mentioned there in chat. Oh, my unmuted. Good. Okay. Are Aaron Bushnell, Tortuguita, and Heather Heyer. Those seem like three that we should definitely be remembering in the modern era. And I don't think I don't think we do nearly good enough of a job at this. We do an okay job for a little while after the person dies, but we don't do a very good job kind of like remembering them for an extended period of time. But also, it's more even than just remembering the modern era. It's about remembering way back, thinking about all the struggles of history and not letting them die. I think that's a important part of it. So what about living culture? What do people think about this part? I actually think we do pretty good at this part. I actually think this is one of the strengths of the modern movement, is that we have a really strong living culture. We have YouTubes and TikToks, and we're writing books, and we have zines and I think that we have a very rich living culture on the left here in the United States, at least.
I think they're very intertwined with each other, those two. Because that's a direct practice of like remembering those things. Like you're reading them over and over again. You're creating memories by like even acting it out, like in a play, or talking about it in a song. I think they're very similar.
So then let's see the next one. Oppositional culture. I think this is like the standard of the left in the United States. I think this is pretty much what we got down. We got that part nailed down. We are an oppositional culture who knows that the dominant culture is corrupt, unjust, expansionist, and relentless. However, people do, I will say, kind of abandon struggle and retreat into isolation a lot. I think that is one of the problems. Yeah. I don't know. What do people think?
I might say like that's because like while we have that within our movement, that's not always the most it's not the most out there like for everybody to see. So when they are lonely, like they don't know where to go to find those connections when they realize the world's fucked up, and they just go into their hidey hole instead of talking with people about it.
Yeah, we were just talking, I think, just last night about how nihilism is such a scourge. It just like completely demotivates people who would otherwise maybe struggle.
Yeah, I was just thinking when we were reading this that, a lot of those other criteria, but especially the first three about memory, living culture, and oppositional culture, it made me think of a lot of indigenous communities. The ones that I know in Canada, there's like definitely, it's huge. Like people are constantly remembering past struggles, and the fight against colonialism is always present, which is something like, I'm not indigenous, like I had to learn that later in life when I become interested in politics and activism. But like a lot of people that I've known that have grown up in indigenous communities, they like as kids, like they learn about this history and this resistance, and it's very much linked to their identity and community for sure.
What do we think about this one? Action and material gains. Well, ends with the quote that I brought up, I guess, but maybe I think that we in the United States, at least, people are good at taking action. I don't know how good they are at the whole material gains part. I think that we've been sort of failing to have material gains for a few generations at this point. Oh my gosh, how do I make this stupid sidebar go away? What is this stupid thing? Oh my gosh, I like activated something I wasn't supposed to activate. It's like annoying. It's in the way. Anyway, I don't know how good we've been at getting material gains for a while, but we definitely do lots of action. That's for sure. What do y'all think?
I don't know. Not the right kind of action to get the gains. We do the same stuff over and over, just kind of standing on the side of the road.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think on that last part, it was talking about like autonomous zones, and I feel like that's an area that, yeah, just people have never carved out those third spaces anymore, or fourth spaces, or fifth spaces even. But just that idea that, yeah, like we've had like resistance culture in America for like how long, and there's still nothing, like there's no real center. Now it's like Facebook groups.
Yeah, I think that's why Cooperation Tulsa having Flat Rock is so important, because it's like actually like a place that we control. It's a place where the left actually has, and we can, it's like, it's a consistent meeting place, but it's also a place for us to socialize.
Yeah, big agree there for sure.
Yeah, I think that we've forgotten the importance of place. Like this is like one of the big critiques that indigenous people have of a lot of Western thought, is that it forgets the concept of place, right? It just sees place as container, rather than understanding that place is like an important conditioning factor to how everything functions. Like you need places, but also like the place itself has importance. Yeah, like reviewer says, liberated actual spaces are hugely important, not just people with liberated ideas operating in the enemy's world, but having places that are the commons and that they have control over. It's really important stuff. Okay. So the next one is solidarity. I will just say that I think this is one of the weakest things for us in the West. I think that we are terrible at solidarity. I think that solidarity is a buzzword to the left in the West, and that people fracture way too easy, that they can't handle criticism from each other. If they get criticized, they think that they're being attacked. They're very defensive. They're very isolated. They want to create spaces with no conflict, and yeah, no, I think that we're really bad at this, to be deadly honest. What do other people think?
Yeah, I agree that it's a buzzword a lot of times when it's used. Like, I can think of an example from a conversation that happened like literally last night. Somebody used that all the time and then said some shit about like a business. So I was like, okay. It's just like we don't practice solidarity. Our whole system is designed by us being individualistic. That's kind of, we don't have enough structures built towards that goal of solidarity, actually practicing that with multiple people. So we don't really see that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a word that the left knows is important because it's in all of our theory, but in practice, like what solidarity was to the workers' movement was like a statement where it's like, yeah, we have common struggles. Even if like me and you, we don't have the same kind of struggle and we don't come from the same place, we share the class struggle. And that allows us to practice material solidarity. I need you to win because we only win together kind of thing, right? And today it seems like a lot of people are forgetting the I only win if we win together kind of thing. Everybody has kind of like fractured into individual issues and have forgotten how all of those issues are interlinked with everything else, and that it's impossible to actually disentangle them, and that all of our issues have to be dealt with simultaneously, that there's no backseat kind of thing. It seems like we've forgotten this aspect. I think it's the one of the sicknesses of the Western left.
Yeah, I like this part. It says through avoid the ideological quibbling, but then you're supposed to focus on the mutual support, feedback, and constructive criticism. I feel like so often like people can't accept like any criticism at all, and so like when you're offering the mutual support and the feedback and the first part of it, and they're not like there's no change behaviors or anything's moving forward, then you get to the criticism part, and that's when things really do fracture. But yeah, again, that's Western individualism, what our society has done to people. So.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, we have a lot of recovery to do on this front. I think that if we began really fixing this in a practical sense, that the left would become more powerful in very short order. But it's a big hurdle to overcome. Next one is risk and self-sacrifice. I actually talked about this one kind of a lot on my YouTube channel. I think people are often very averse to self-sacrifice. And there's a sort of this like people reasonably are like, we shouldn't have to destroy ourselves to get things done, like we need to let ourselves rest as well. And like, all this stuff sounds really nice until a lot of people end up just kind of using it as an excuse not to do things. Like, oh, I'm getting, I need it's not that people don't need rest. I don't want it to sound like that, but like people use that as an excuse. They don't want to get outside their comfort zone. And so they just kind of use these things as a crutch. Self-care becomes a crutch rather than something you have to do and you should do in order to have a rich life and to continue going. Instead of seeing it as maintenance, they basically see laziness as maintenance, to the degree where a lot of people on the left pretend that laziness doesn't even exist. I've definitely heard lots of people say that they don't think there is any such thing. And that's fine. People can have that perspective, but I definitely think that there is a lot of excuse making that people do on the left, when they should be trying to work harder, be consistent, be responsible, practice discipline and learn discipline. They don't want to. They just want short-term gains. But
I had a friend argue that all of human progress was driven by laziness. He seemed to think that like every innovation and everything that made like our lives easier was somehow, so that you could have more leisure time. Which I always thought was kind of an interesting concept. Not that I would necessarily agree with it. Just to kind of put a counterpoint on what you're saying.
I would say
how laziness doesn't exist. This guy seemed to think that it most definitely did exist and was driving all.
And that it's good. It's what creates progress. I've held the similar opinion when I was young, and I believed that progress was linear. But go on, Logan. I heard you say something.
Yeah, I agree with like part of it. Maybe not like the fact that laziness always breeds innovation, but like the fact that people are tired of doing the same shit over and over again. It's inefficient. They see a different way, right? This like I guess you can consider that laziness, not wanting to do that. But I think just the fact to think of it in a different way, like the fact that you can have leisure time and your needs met. So you have more time where you can be disciplined in your own right and think about these things. We will have much more innovation. We will have much more human development throughout the world if people have their needs met and they can have that time. But sadly, that's not the systems that we live in. That's kind of the problem. That's what we got to fix.
Yeah, no, I actually do think I agree with your friend to some degree. I think that like a lot of the human desire to advance or to progress is so that we have more luxury time. I think I agree with that. But of course, the advancing itself requires hard work,
I think it's interesting though, because right now there's studies out that say that like with the work or productive capacity that we have, we would only need like 30% or something.
Right.
So I also think about like how whether it's true or not, I've heard the concept that medieval peasants worked like less hours than normal Americans are doing right now, with like more vacation times, things like that. So yeah, like kind of going along those lines, I think if we start to look at the work as being fun and also understand that like all the work isn't necessarily going to be like active work, like we need to find the people or find ways to include everyone in that work. And then everyone gets a share of that, and then we only need 30% of productive capacity to like.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. No, we have a society where if everything were reorganized right now, we would all need to work so much less. Like automation could solve so many problems. We would have enough food to feed everybody. Water could all be
so
potable.
making that work fun and also like efficient, and also showing people like maybe like a way that like achieves abundance without like as much work. Fun work.
I think the way that you make jobs seem like quote unquote fun is just like at least giving people the ability to expand what they have an affinity for. Like if they want to do something, you actually give them the ability to do that. But that's the way, first and foremost, you can make people's jobs feel meaningful. I wouldn't even consider them jobs necessarily. They're just like they're doing work for the society, for things that are needed, and for their own development, for innovation. Like they want to invent something to be lazier in the future, I guess.
I don't think that's not even a bad way to look at it, because that is actually like what a lot of innovation comes from. I agree. So anyway, go on.
Yeah, I was also gonna like just. I also think the innovation comes from the fact that you want to put like you think of something, but you want to put that into the world. Like you don't want to just think about it like that's where creativity comes in, like the arts and such. But these things can't really be done in the systems where people aren't able to have these things provided. And that's like water. Like we use so much water on stuff that does not need to be used on. We just overproduce like a bunch of cloth, a bunch of clothes and stuff that gets thrown out. All that water is wasted for nothing. And then we have a bunch of food that we throw out. Like it's so ridiculous.
So I just want to note that we are coming around to time now. It is now 9:00 in our time zone. And so anybody have any last thoughts before we close the session? Well, I actually think it went really well, given that we only had a few people here. This one definitely had less attendance than some of the previous ones. But we had our readers, we had our 3, and it worked out just fine. That was it was actually a good section. And part of me kind of wants to continue this part of the discussion at the beginning of the following session, but I also don't want to break up our reliable cycle here. But I think that talking about all of these points here in this section of the book is probably a good idea. But yeah, because we still have a few here: moral and material support for frontline activists, communities and community building, conscious movement building, parallel institutions, subsistence and community sufficiency. These are all things we could probably have another hour conversation about. But yeah. No, that was a good one. I'm glad y'all showed up. I appreciate everybody, all the readers showing up, and everybody here having a discussion. I appreciate everybody showing up on live stream. I also just want to say that if you want to be in the reading group portion, you can go over to Cooperation Tulsa's Open Collective and become a recurring donor. And if you become a recurring donor for any amount, all you have to do is reach out to us, and we will give you access to the Cooperation Tulsa server. And as you have access to the Cooperation Tulsa server, you will be able to see all of our event notifications, including this reading group and also the Popular Education reading group, which takes place on alternating Mondays. So Don't forget to tune in, not here, but through the link on alternating Mondays in order to see the popular education group, and that one's with Theo. But that is about it. I appreciate y'all showing up, and that's the end of the live stream. I'm going to close off the live stream.
Have a good night, y'all.
All right, see y'all later.